Hello, wine lovers. I don't mean to lay too much on you today, but we are going to delve into the details of two areas of winemaking, vineyard management and the use of barrels. More specifically, how a winemaker chooses from a multitude of options which barrels will work best for them. Join me for today's educational conversation.
I think about sometimes our barrels, we want a barrel that's really a wow factor on the nose, but maybe the texture on the palate isn't perfect on that particular barrel, but another barrel might be a structure barrel, and another barrel just might be the glue that pulls them all together.
My guest for this episode is Joe Nielsen of Sonoma County's Ramsgate Winery. Over the years working in and around the wine industry, people ask me about the barrels that are used. Are they French? Is it always 100% new oak? How many times can you use them? And so on. But there are many more options a winemaker or an owner needs to consider when choosing a barrel. We'll go deep into that topic in a little bit. But we'll start by touching upon pressure bombs. That's right. But first, On the Wine Road podcast is sponsored by Sonoma Clean Power. For those of you in Sonoma County, learn how your actions can make a greater impact with clean, renewable energy at poweringeverydaymoments.org. That's poweringeverydaymoments.org. Ramsgate winemaker Joe Nielsen and I sat in a space just off the tasting room, and Joe is the general manager of Ramsgate as well as the winemaker. So I was grateful that he was able to spend time with me to share his methods and the multitude of choices that he has to make. Just prior to getting together, I heard about the pressure bombs as a means for kind of giving the vineyards a checkup. In all the interviews I've done and all the studying of wine over the years, I've never heard of pressure bombs. And the process has proved successful for Joe. So that's where we'll start. Tell me how you manage your farm holistically, which led to the use of pressure bombs to study the water needs on the property.
Sure. Holistic to me is an idea. It's probably more like sustainability than any specific classification from farming. It's being thoughtful in our farming choices, which has led us to organic, but it may have led us somewhere else at a different location or a different terroir. But here, our holistic approach is being sustainable, being thoughtful about what predator birds we have on site, making choices that maybe don't affect rabbits, where the rabbits really aren't doing anything on our property that are an issue. Even when it came to using glyphosate or not, it's not a requirement to not use that in organic. There are organic options, but I decided I didn't like the idea of having to use herbicides if we didn't have to, so we have implemented sheep, which you just saw as you came up the driveway. Yeah. I wouldn't say we were the first, but it seemed like we jumped on that bandwagon before everyone else did, but now everyone has sheep, which is great. So I think it's just not always limiting yourself to the classification of farming that you're currently doing. It's taking a bigger view if you can.
But tell me about these pressure bombs. I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, pressure bomb is an old tech, and now with the amount of technology that's in a vineyard, most people poo-poo it because it is sort of old school. But it's very simple. It's a pressure bomb or a pressure chamber. You use an inert gas like nitrogen to pressurize a chamber. You put a leaf in there, and you can actually measure with some decent reliability the turgor pressure within that leaf, and that can correlate to very specific stress tolerance in that property, in that vineyard. And it's sort of creating data lines based on that. Not one measurement will tell you the whole story. But with my way of managing vineyards and wines, it's more of looking at a trend versus looking at a specific number always, because sometimes, just like in accounting and other businesses, one number doesn't tell the whole story. Right. So, but by doing that, grapevines are notorious liars for water, and knowing a stress level you can take a vine to without doing any long-term damage to it will hypothetically produce better wine. So that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, I read the results of those tactics led to Ramsgate reducing their water needs by 33%. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's vintage specific too. So in 2020, we were watering in the spring. 2019, by doing pressure bombs, we were able to move our first irrigation to late summer. And then even in a dry vintage, we are not watering until midsummer versus late spring. So water is a precious commodity in California. So outside of just being sustainable, it's actually critical for most wineries and vineyards to be very conscientious with water use.
Yeah. I imagine your innovative thinking is what led the owners of Ramsgate to offer you the general manager position while retaining your winemaker duties.
I hope so.
They saw something in you.
Yeah. I think the troubleshooting nature that I possess, or I think that's required as a winemaker, I think always, and I'm biased here, but a production mind is good for running a business because we have to forecast so far in the future with farming or where a wine's going to be, that our mind's always months, if not years, down the road. Even pre-harvest, when we start actually talking about dates, my mind's like, wait, it's still July? Oh, I'm already planning September. So...
Mm-hmm. Do you find the additional duties of managing the company are keeping you on your toes, maybe a little more than you expected?
It's something that I've always enjoyed. Even prior to Ramsgate, I worked for a much smaller company, but I was involved in many facets of the business. I learned early on, and coming through a recession, the Great Recession at my last job, that it was all hands on deck most of the time. So understanding the value and knowing how to sell wine as well as make the wine, I think, is an important trait, and especially in this area where there's so much saturation with other wineries that you need to wear many hats to be sometimes successful in this business.
I've talked to a few winemakers who became GMs, and they kind of lamented the fact that they were in the office more often than they were in the vineyard or the cellar.
For me, what makes the wine business interesting is the amount of different things you can do in this industry. And even for myself as a winemaker, I've always enjoyed, and I'm sure other people that you know would attest to this, I do enjoy spreadsheets. I do enjoy accounting. Oh. But I also like getting my boots dirty. I like lifting and doing physical activity as well. So it actually is really helpful for my personality type to be able to do all different things, because I get not bored, but I need something fresh. So this morning we were out in vineyards. Yesterday we were tasting wines. The day before I was working on year-end close for our business. So I don't know. It suits my personality quite well.
Apparently, Joe can easily tap into both sides of his brain, the right for the art of winemaking and the left for spreadsheets and accounting. But I understand the left or right brain dominance is just a theory. So enough of that. But deciphering an abundance of details certainly takes focus and foresight. You'll hear about the many options that need to be considered when choosing a wine barrel when I return from this important message.
Life is made up of moments that matter. Those Little League games under the lights, building the best ice cream sundaes, those family photo shoots, and unforgettable senior proms. As your public power provider, we at Sonoma Clean Power thrive on being part of your everyday moments, the moments we all cherish. That's why with every small effort, we're working toward a clean energy future for our families, teammates, neighbors, and those we have not yet met. So let's come together, work together, take care of today, and honor tomorrow. Let's protect the place we call home, the place where our children's children will grow. Join us on the clean energy journey, because the best is yet to come. Learn how your actions can make an even greater impact at poweringeverydaymoments.org. Sonoma Clean Power, powering moments that matter.
Now, as I continue my discussion with winemaker and general manager Joe Nielsen of Ramsgate Winery, I have a feeling that when you hear the many jaw-dropping details that are related to choosing a barrel, you'll have a greater appreciation for what went into that next bottle of wine you consume. And you'll hear a little bit about the winemaking decisions they have to make. What they do is truly a thoughtfully crafted combination of art and science. Some winemakers, like you, choose different types of wine barrels depending on the grapes you're using and the final flavor profile that you're attempting to achieve. So surely that requires a lot of experimentation.
100%, yes. There's different philosophies in winemaking. Some feel using one or two coopers helps demonstrate the variety that they work with, the vineyards they work with, and using that as a constant in their scientific experiment, if we want to call it that. For me, it's more like cooking, where once you've experienced different types of salt, you realize that your pinch of salt really depends on the dish, and it really does, and even the texture. Does it need to be coarse? Does it need to be fine grained or whatever? Mm-hmm. Does it need to be smoked salt? Does it need to be pink Himalayan sea salt? There's so much diversity there to me. So not that I'm a great chef, but I enjoy good ingredients. So for me, barrels are our spice rack, and it's very specific to the vineyard we're working with. And then it gets more specific the more you learn. So it's not just the vineyard, it's the variety. Then from the variety, it's the clone. And then it could be the soil type. It could be north face, east, south, west facing aspects and how the vines ripen. And we try to keep those separate. And, wow. And that experience in the barrel is perceived differently. So it is a rabbit hole. Initially it was, I remember 2014, several coopers came cold calling at the winery I was at prior, and like, let's give it a try. And now it's 2023, and we haven't finished our hunt, or my hunt, because I think the more you learn, the more you realize there's more to learn. It's sort of an analogy for life. It's just there's no end date.
Speaking of dates, you'll hear Joe mention 2023 a couple of times during this segment, as I recorded this interview last year during the 2023 season. Also, you'll hear him mention coopers quite a bit. You may or may not know that barrels are made in a cooperage, so those who make them are called coopers. So he's not referring to some woodworking family in France named, Cooper.
Since Rachel Bordes joined our team, we've made it more scientific. We've now track it barrel by barrel within each lot and actually grade based on the qualities it enhances or hurts a particular single vineyard or a clone within a single vineyard. So some barrels that work really well on Hyde Robert Young clone Chardonnay don't work as well on the Hyde Muscat selection. So sort of breaking that apart a little bit is fun. I think it's sort of perfecting that ingredient. It's like saying, you need to saute your meat before you put it in your stew, and instead of saying, let's just throw it all in and it will cook at some point. So really trying to understand each element before your stew is assembled, so to speak, so that each ingredient tastes right in that context of whatever you're trying to make. So the short answer is it depends, but I gave you the long one.
I imagine at some point you have the same juice in two different barrels just to see and then taste and then have a little bit quicker response to what may work better than another.
Sure. I mean, some of our lots are so small that we really can't. Some of them are very small where it's just one barrel, and it's intuition, it's trial and error, and it's not my first vintage. So we do try to skip to the front of the line, and we know, okay, this particular cooper will do X, Y, and Z hypothetically to a wine, so we might exclude something that doesn't fit that. But beyond that, it's still trial and error. So, but we're often looking at multiple new oak barrels in a single lot, so then we can compare and contrast within that context of that wine. So in the context of if there is multiple barrels in a lot, we want to think about how does each barrel affect its palate. Sometimes we say it's a great nose, but the mouthfeel is not as good as this barrel. This barrel's got an awesome mouthfeel, but maybe the nose isn't as good. So it's assembling wine in a different context, and this doesn't actually include our blending trials. Our blending trials are kind of a bigger picture and less specific, and this is uber specific, but it's sort of evaluating from a different angle.
I was wondering if you would choose a barrel that provided a better aroma than another would with mouthfeel, because I would think mouthfeel would be the ultimate preference of the two, but maybe not, and hopefully you'll find the barrel that brings it both together.
Totally. And its context, I would say my personal preference is heavily weighted towards palate. And then I've always had this philosophy that if you're working with grapefruit, the wine will come through on the nose, but you can't fake a mouthfeel. If the mouthfeel's not there, it's not. So,
Right.
And there's not much you can do after that. So palate's always important. If the wine smells great and tastes terrible, then we just make candles.
And the thing about experimentation is barrels are expensive. You can't just be buying a bunch of barrels to try them out.
Right. You get one try a year.
Right. Yeah.
And once the wine's in the barrel, unless there's a flaw, you're kind of committed for that vintage. Maybe you take it out earlier or later, depending. But this is a long trial. This is the long game. So if my experimentation started in 2014 and I feel like I'm just getting a grasp on it in 2023, that's by design. It's to keep me engaged and oak keeps changing. We have a climate involved that's shaping the oak that hasn't been harvested yet. It's made mostly by people, and people's preferences change, palates change, techniques change, equipment is bought at the cooper that changes how something might taste. So it's an ever-evolving problem in a good way, though.
Because the details are so minute on some of these. Yeah, one little change like that can throw you off when, 2-3 years later when you're finally trying to bring something forward and you're like, wait a minute, this didn't taste like this last time.
Yeah, so wine's evolving, but even you're buying barrels typically based on last year's experience for next year's fruit, and next year's vintage could be very different. So that's where, yes, we don't subscribe to the one size fits all, so we have variety, but that variety also allows us to make same day decisions that we couldn't have done if we were stuck with one option. So it allows us also some flexibility. If the vintage turns in a direction that's very different from the previous vintage, then we have diversity to pull from. We have a deep bullpen.
How about getting as detailed as the forest from which they are sourcing their oak?
Of course. Yeah, that's an element.
And the narrow slats of the barrel, which are called staves, are bent by fire. But I've also heard that some are incorporating water or steam to bend staves. Have you tried any of that, or are you just pretty much toasted staves?
Yeah, we do a combination of all. And then there's even kiln-fired or like baked. And then some are actually being cooked over like a clay pot, so that you're not seeing direct flame. So it's almost like a baking effect versus a toasting. But it really depends. Some water bent is really good. Some fire bent's really good. Sometimes one cooper, it tastes better one way or the other, and then it could be the opposite with another cooper. So I think especially when it comes to French oak or barrels in general, one technique is not the same across the board.
So I guess with the baking, do you still get the toast at some point? Because I know the choice of either a medium toast or medium plus is usually there, but it's not always there.
I haven't been to some of the coopers that do this. It is a different flavor, but you still get charring. You still get cooked. I think it's a different flavor altogether.
What about the width of the grain of the staves? And I know that makes a difference too. And do you have a preference for those?
That falls into the depends category. It depends on the wine. Tighter grain is sometimes really helpful, but I think on the surface we think about winemaking in extremes, that tight grain is good, wide grain is bad, or Tranche is the best for us because it has the tendency for the most amount of tight grain. But to me, that really depends on the wine and what the wines need. Juppie is very pretty. Bertrange to me is more smoky and meaty. Allier is beautiful and precise. Vosges is more voluptuous. Chatillon is voluptuous and spicy. So every forest has a different characteristic, and there's tight and loose grains within all of them. So it's helpful sometimes, but it's not always the recipe for for success. If you like cooking with olive oil and your cookies call for butter, you don't put olive oil in your cookies. Like, you have to kind of adjust how you do something based on what you need it for. So grain is important, but it's not the only factor.
And then you even have a choice of whether you want to mix and match. You can have some staves that are wider, some are narrower, and so you can mix that up as well.
Yeah, there's the variables are mostly, I would say, endless. You can source by forest. You can do blended forest. Some coopers have house blends, and that's their secret sauce. I don't necessarily always know what their house blends work, and if they work, then let's not overthink it. Companies like Francois Ferrer rely on grain size to kind of classify their barrels, and that has sometimes some correlation with forest, not always. Some coopers are now sourcing based on soil type, which at first I thought was crazy, but again, proof has to be in the pudding, and there is a cooper that we work with too, actually, that do it based on soil type. So within a forest, there might be a sandy section, or there could be a clay section or a rocky section, and the terroir of the forest has influenced the flavor of the wine. There's even coopers that there's subspecies of oak, French oak, that they only source for because it has a particular flavor. I just learned that, and so that's like another variable I didn't even consider.
That's crazy to think the terroir of the forest can have effect on the barrel, which affects your wine, and the terroir from which the grapes are grown here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think originally when I heard that concept, I thought that was taking it too far. However, if they can isolate those and the wine or the barrel produces a particular mouthfeel or flavor, and that works well with your wine, I wouldn't say I'm making a wine from a sandy soil. I need to find a barrel that is grown from oak in a sandy soil.
Well, right,
to me, whether or not those have any correlation, I don't know. And that's originally where I took it. It's like, why would that matter to me? But if that is their way of sourcing and it produces X and X is beautiful, then great. I'll buy X as well.
Right. Are you 100% French oak, or do you vary that as well, depending on what grape variety you're working with?
Well, I have been 100% French oak from 2012 through 2022, but I have a friend that has convinced me to trial again Hungarian, so 2023 we will try a little bit of Hungarian.
How about new oak to neutral oak?
Depends on the wine. Nothing is 100% with us. Just like we don't choose from one barrel, we don't do anything extreme, so it's a varying amount. Some wines get no new oak, some get 10%, 20%, 30%, up to our cabs sometimes get 60, 65%, but I do like the character that is in cab as a variety, so I like to see that in the finished wine, and so we don't do 100% of anything.
Okay. I thought it'd be fun to mention the wine varieties that you work with and the barrels you use with those varieties. But then I got to thinking it might even depend on what vineyards you're pulling from. You mentioned it earlier that you might use a different barrel for a different vineyard.
Yeah. I mean, even
or
within...
the clone within that vineyard, yeah, and where that vine is located in that vineyard.
Totally. And so this is where I think, talking about the people you buy from, when I say I love your barrel and I'm buying 6... they're like, well, but I thought you loved my barrel. Why aren't you buying more? And like, well, it's very specific and it works really well on these 2 wines or this clone and that clone. And we really love that. And that's perfect. And 7 is unnecessary and 5 wouldn't be enough. So we are very specific. We counted them up yesterday. I think we're working with 17 coopers. And then you wanted to know variety or?
Yeah. Okay. Pinot Noir.
Yeah, Pinot Noir, we're somewhere between 30 and 35% new French oak, and we've got about 7 coopers with endless variety within those 7 coopers on those, about 5 coopers on Chardonnay, 3 coopers on Sauv Blanc. We're going to try the Hungarian oak on Pinot Blanc, just a little bit. The only thing that, well, typically Pinot Blanc doesn't get any new oak, but 2021, we did have one new oak barrel out of the however many we had. So a little bit goes a long way, but it's a place for trial.
So you are using oak on your whites. Chardonnay, I know that a lot of winemakers will age it in oak, but Pinot Blanc as well, huh?
Up until 21, we do ferment Pinot Blanc in a small vessel. It's usually neutral barrels or a Mueller or a stainless steel barrel. I have always enjoyed making white wine in barrel, regardless of if there's new oak or not. And I think partly I tend to pick and produce wines that have lots of freshness and minerality. And a barrel gives me the opportunity to surly, and it has the ratio that I like of lees to wine, and it is easy for us to work on if we want to batonnage and stir and give it some richness. Mm-hmm. And so that's just kind of how I've fallen into that I like barrel fermenting almost all my whites, if not all of them.
To jump in again, in case you're not aware, lees is the sediment, like dead yeast cells, grape pulp, and other particles that collect on the bottom of the barrel as the wine ages. In French, sur lie means on the lees. When the lees is stirred within the barrel, it's called batonnage, stirring the wine with a baton, so to mix the lees within the wine, like sugar in coffee. The lees enhances flavor, aroma, and texture. And by the way, if you're tiring of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, try Pinot Blanc. It's a nice alternative. Joe's Pinot Blanc features natural acidity, but is beautifully balanced with that richness and texture we just mentioned. Kind of rounds off the mouthfeel too a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's where we have that freshness and someone says, wow, that's really got beautiful minerality. And then they kind of finish that sip and they say, but there's some nice richness underneath that. And that's kind of where we want to have some balancing to the freshness.
Mm-hmm. How about the Syrah?
Syrah, I've been all over the map with, more so with my former employer. For us, the defining feature in Syrah ends up being a lot of whole cluster. That's something that I have always enjoyed doing, so that really builds structure and a spice all to itself. And then finding coopers that really balance against that. But I have found some of the most beautiful Syrahs have no new oak. The vineyards that we're working with currently do support some new oak, so it really depends where Syrah's coming from. But I've gone both ways with that variety.
Tell us about your cellar note series and the special attributes of those wines.
Yeah, I think wines can be created from a lot of different viewpoints. A lot of larger appellated wines that wineries are making that are available in restaurants or retail shops typically follow a narrative of consistency and a similar product year over year, and makes it a lot easier to sell it that way. Then there are single vineyards that are specific to a site, and then sometimes I like to view wine blending from the view of what highlights either technique or let's highlight the vintage, and let's worry less about whether the 19 and the 20 are similar. Mm-hmm. And so in Cellar Note Chardonnay, Cellar Note Pinot, the compositions have changed and evolved a lot from 18 through the 22, which we're working on right now. But the theme there is that it is an expression of vintage, and it's often an expression of variety. So on those two wines, it's a single variety, and we're kind of allowing the vintage to dictate where the final blend goes versus saying it has to feel and taste this way. So we do number each cellar note, and the idea too is that cuvee number 1, cuvee number 2, there's a reason and a thought behind how those became, but the resulting wine can be very different. So I think it's an opportunity for customers to explore with us a little bit on a yearly basis, and maybe they love the 20, they love the 22, and the 21 is a little bit different for them. But I would say ultimately the goal is to make something pleasurable and delicious every year, but how we arrive there could be a little bit different depending on the vintage.
And my favorite is your blend, the Grenache Syrah. Love that cellar note.
Yeah, and that's where if anyone knows me, I have a lot of rules, and I'm always the first to break those rules. So with Cellar Note, the idea originally was vintage specific and varietally specific, but to me, some of the best Grenache in the world always has a companion of Syrah or Mourvedre to round out that wine. That's probably why it's classically been done that way. So yeah, that's a fun blend that definitely harkens back to my past, my winemaking in Rhone style wines. So it's something I enjoy making. And then to finish the conversation on oak, typically no new oak is used on Grenache and Mourvedre.
While I still enjoy the Grenache Syrah Cellar Note, for 2024, he's releasing a GSM Cellar Note, Grenache Syrah Mourvedre, that is elegant and delicious. It goes down so easily. Surprisingly, it won't be available at Ramsgate until later this summer, but they're pouring it now by the glass at Girl and the Fig restaurant in Sonoma as of last week. If you're nearby, be sure to try it. Well, Joe, I have to say, all the efforts that you put into managing the vineyards, your employees, and making the wine that you're producing has become evident in the quality of the wines that you're offering here at Ramsgate. I think you're doing an excellent job.
Thanks so much. Thanks for taking your time to ask me these good questions.
Now that you've learned more about barrels than you ever thought you would, the next time you're in a tasting room, ask the server some pointed questions about their winery's barrel program and impress them with your knowledge. I dare you. See the rustic yet gorgeous Ramsgate Winery for yourself the next time you're near Sonoma, California. Visit ramsgatewinery.com. Look for bottles on store shelves, or you can buy online. I appreciate you listening again today. This episode was written, edited, and produced by me. Yep, I'm a solo operation. Please subscribe to On the Wine Road podcast so each episode will automatically appear on your favorite platform. And I appreciate a positive review if that's an option. Find images, wine news, trivia, and more interviews at onthewineroad.us. I'm on Facebook as On the Wine Road and Instagram as JD Wine Road. I'll talk to you again soon as I share more from my travels on the Wine Road. I'm Jeff Davis.